When Rory McIlroy finally broke his silence on Bryson DeChambeau, it wasn't just another player taking a subtle jab at a rival. This was different. This was the four-time major champion, the PGA Tour's most vocal defender, the man who turned down hundreds of millions to stay loyal, finally pulling back the curtain on a tension that's been simmering since 2020. And what he revealed wasn't just about slow play or quirky behavior. It was about a fundamental divide that's tearing professional golf apart. Tradition versus disruption, loyalty versus opportunity, the soul of the game versus the science of winning. This isn't petty drama. This is an identity crisis. The moment came during a press conference at the Genesis Invitational, where Rory was asked about potential Ryder Cup pairings if LIV players were allowed to return to international competition. His response was measured at first, diplomatic even, but then he leaned forward and said something that sent shockwaves through the golf media ecosystem. He didn't just criticize Bryson's decision to join LIV Golf. He questioned the entire philosophy that made that decision possible. Rory talked about players who optimize everything to the point where they forget they're playing a game, who turned golf into a lab experiment, and who prioritized personal gain over the collective good of professional golf. He never said Bryson's name in that particular answer, but everyone in that room knew exactly who he meant. The statistics behind Rory's frustration are revealing. During the 2022 season, before Bryson's official departure to LIV, pace of play data showed that DeChambeau averaged 4 hours and 52 minutes per round in stroke play events, nearly 18 minutes longer than the PGA Tour average of 4 hours and 34 minutes. That might not sound catastrophic, but when you're paired with Bryson in a feature group on CBS, that translates to broadcast complications, scheduling nightmares, and frustrated playing partners who have to adjust their rhythm. Brooks Koepka famously complained about being paired with Bryson at the 2021 PGA Championship, and their antagonism became such a ratings draw that CBS leaned into it, creating a rivalry narrative that pulled in 6.3 million viewers for the final round, a 23% increase over the previous year's championship finale. But Rory's real issue wasn't just about how long Bryson took to hit shots. It was about what those extra minutes represented. An obsessive, data-driven approach that fundamentally challenged the romantic notion of golf as a game of feel, instinct, and artistry. Bryson publicly discussed his use of vector analysis for green reading, his single-length irons that defied decades of club-fitting conventions, and his transformation from a wiry amateur into a 240-pound powerhouse who could overpower any golf course on the planet. By the end of 2020, Bryson's average driving distance had reached 322.1 yards, the longest on the PGA Tour by more than 3 yards over the second-place finisher. That doesn't happen through traditional practice. That happens through speed training protocols, biomechanical analysis, nutrition programs that border on bodybuilding regimens, and a willingness to completely reimagine what a professional golfer's body should look like. Rory watched all of this unfold with growing unease. As someone who had been naturally long off the tee his entire career, averaging 317.7 yards in 2020 without any dramatic physical transformation, he represented the traditional path to power. Natural talent refined through thousands of hours of practice. Bryson's approach suggested that talent could be engineered, that the game's mysteries could be solved through science and sheer force. And when Bryson won the 2020 U.S. Open at winged foot by 6 strokes, bombing drivers over fairway bunkers that everyone else had to navigate, it felt like a validation of everything the traditional guard found unsettling. The tension escalated when LIV Golf emerged with its Saudi-backed billions, and Bryson became one of its marquee signings. The reported figure was $125 million guaranteed, plus equity stakes in the league and appearance fees that dwarfed anything the PGA Tour could offer. Rory, meanwhile, had reportedly turned down an offer exceeding $500 million to stay with the PGA Tour, and he became the tour's most visible spokesman during the LIV crisis. He appeared on podcast after podcast, gave interview after interview, defending the PGA Tour's structure, its meritocracy, its history. He argued that professional golf's integrity depended on earned success, not guaranteed paychecks. And then he watched as Bryson, someone he'd already viewed as representing golf's problematic future, took the money and left. The numbers behind LIV's disruption are staggering. In its inaugural 2022 season, LIV Golf spent an estimated $784 million on player guarantees, event purses, and operational costs, yet struggled to secure a major U.S. broadcast deal, relying instead on the CW network and YouTube streaming. Viewership for LIV events averaged between 300,000 and 450,000 viewers per broadcast compared to PGA Tour events on CBS and NBC that regularly pulled between 1.8 and 3.2 million viewers depending on the star power in contention. Bryson's own social media following exploded during this period. His YouTube channel grew from 180,000 subscribers in early 2022 to over 1.4 million by mid-2024 as he leaned into content creation and direct fan engagement in ways that traditional tour players hadn't explored. Rory's comments at the Genesis Invitational weren't spontaneous. They were the culmination of nearly 3 years of watching the sport he loves fracture along philosophical and financial lines, with Bryson as the most visible symbol of everything he believes is wrong with professional golf's current trajectory. When pressed by reporters about whether he could ever play alongside Bryson again in a Ryder Cup format, Rory paused for what felt like an eternity, then said, "I'll do whatever's asked of me for the team, but let's not pretend there isn't a fundamental difference in how we see this game and what it should represent." That difference isn't just personal, it's structural, financial, and existential. And it's why Rory's willingness to finally speak openly about Bryson matters so much right now. The divide between Rory McIlroy and Bryson DeChambeau represents something far more significant than two elite athletes who don't particularly like each other. This is a clash of worldviews that cuts to the core of what professional golf is supposed to be. On one side stands Rory, the purist who believes golf's greatness lies in its unpredictability, its demand for creativity under pressure, its requirement that players adapt to conditions rather than impose their will through physical dominance. On the other side stands Bryson, the engineer who believes every problem in golf has a solution waiting to be discovered through rigorous analysis, that the human body is a machine that can be optimized, and that tradition should never stand in the way of improvement. The statistical evidence of their philosophical divide is everywhere. Consider their approaches to driving distance. Rory's 2024 season saw him average 320.3 yards off the tee, a figure that's remained remarkably consistent throughout his career. He's always been long, always been powerful, but that power came from technique developed as a teenager in Northern Ireland, refined through natural athletic development. Bryson's journey was radically different. In 2016, his rookie season, he averaged 302.5 yards. By 2020, after his physical transformation, he was at 322.1 yards. By 2023, even after some regression from his absolute peak, he was still averaging 317.8 yards, and his ball speed measurements consistently registered in the 190 to 195 miles per hour range. Numbers that border on long drive competitor territory rather than touring professional norms. But the distance gap alone doesn't tell the full story. It's what that distance represents in terms of course strategy and competitive equity. When Bryson could hit driver on holes where everyone else hit 3-wood or long iron, he wasn't just gaining strokes, he was fundamentally changing the architecture's intent. At the 2020 U.S. Open at Winged Foot, a course specifically designed to punish aggressive play and reward precision, Bryson hit driver on holes where even Dustin Johnson and Rory laid back. He averaged 325 yards off the tee that week and hit only 23 of 56 fairways, a 41% fairway percentage that would typically doom a player at a U.S. Open. But his length advantage meant he was hitting short irons and wedges into greens where others were hitting mid-irons, and that margin for error overwhelmed the traditional U.S. Open formula. He won by 6 strokes with a closing 67, and traditionalists were horrified. Rory's response at the time was telling. In his post-tournament interview, he congratulated Bryson but added, "I think we might need to have a conversation about where this goes. If the solution to major championship golf is just to hit it as far as possible regardless of accuracy, we're losing something essential." The PGA of America and USGA took notice. Within 18 months, discussions about rolling back the golf ball, limiting distance for elite players, accelerated. Equipment regulations tightened. Course setup philosophies changed. with narrow fairway corridors and thicker rough becoming standard at majors. The entire governing structure of professional golf shifted in response to what Bryson had proven was possible. The business implications of this philosophical war extend far beyond course setup. Equipment manufacturers saw opportunity in both approaches. TaylorMade, Bryson's club sponsor, leaned heavily into speed and distance marketing, creating driver campaigns that emphasized ball speed and launch conditions, appealing to the analytical golfer who wanted to optimize launch monitors and TrackMan numbers. Callaway and TaylorMade's Rory-endorsed products, meanwhile, emphasized feel, workability, and shot shaping, the tools of a craftsman rather than an engineer. The marketing split was clean. Buy Bryson's equipment if you want to overpower courses. Buy Rory's equipment if you want to play beautiful golf. Endorsement portfolios reflected these different brands. Bryson's partnerships included DuPont, a chemical and materials science company, and Bose, emphasizing technology and innovation. His social media content featured lab testing, biomechanical breakdowns, and collaborations with speed trainers and physicists. Rory's endorsements included Nike for years before switching to TaylorMade, Omega watches, and EA Sports, brands that emphasized heritage, achievement, and traditional excellence. When EA Sports rebuilt their golf video game franchise after years of dormancy, they chose Rory as the cover athlete, not Bryson. The message was clear. Rory represented golf's aspirational ideal, while Bryson represented its controversial future. The transformation of Bryson's body became its own referendum on what professional golf should look like. Between 2019 and 2020, he gained approximately 40 pounds of muscle mass, bringing his playing weight to somewhere between 235 and 240 pounds. His training regimen included Olympic-style weightlifting, plyometric exercises designed for explosive power, and a nutrition program that required consuming over 5,000 calories per day. He publicly documented this transformation, sharing workout videos and discussing his protein intake in interviews. For some fans, this was inspiring, a demonstration of commitment and innovation. For others, including many of his fellow professionals, it felt like a betrayal of golf's essence. The whispered concern among tour players, one that Rory has alluded to without explicitly stating, is whether Bryson's approach is sustainable or even healthy. Professional golf has traditionally been a sport where players can compete at the highest level well into their 40s. See Phil Mickelson winning the 2021 PGA Championship at age 50, or Vijay Singh contending into his mid-50s. The longevity of a golf career depends on avoiding injury, maintaining consistency, and managing the physical toll of elite competition. Bryson's power-at-all-cost transformation raised questions. Can a body maintain that muscle mass and explosive speed without breaking down? What happens when the speed fades? Can he adapt his game? Or has he become so specialized that any regression makes him uncompetitive? Those questions started finding answers in 2022 and 2023. Bryson dealt with wrist injuries, hand injuries, and hip issues that limited his tournament appearances. In 2022, he played only 11 LIV events, plus a handful of majors, a dramatically reduced schedule compared to the 20-plus PGA Tour events he'd typically play in previous seasons. His world ranking, which had reached number 4 at its peak, plummeted outside the top 50 as limited playing opportunities and LIV's lack of world ranking points took their toll. The injuries seemed to validate what skeptics had predicted, that his physical approach was unsustainable, that golf's greatest champions succeed through longevity and adaptability, not through short-term physical dominance. Rory, meanwhile, maintained remarkable consistency. Between 2020 and 2024, he never fell below 7th in the world rankings, won multiple PGA Tour events each season, and contended in nearly every major championship despite a frustrating drought without a 5th major victory since 2014. His driving distance remained elite without requiring constant physical transformation. His iron play, often overlooked in favor of narratives about power, consistently ranked in the top 10 for approaches from 175 to 200 yards. His putting, historically his weakness, improved through technical refinements rather than wholesale changes. He represented the traditional path to sustained excellence, and his consistency became its own argument against Bryson's methods. The cultural clash between these philosophies manifests in locker room dynamics that rarely become public. Multiple tour players, speaking anonymously to golf journalists, have described Bryson as exhausting to be around. Someone who can't just play golf. Everything has to be an experiment or a theory. One veteran tour player told Golf Digest, "You ask him how his round went and he'll spend 15 minutes talking about his swing plane and launch angles." Sometimes golf is just about hitting good shots and making putts. Not everything needs to be solved. That quote never mentioned Bryson by name, but the context made the target obvious. Rory's leadership position within the PGA Tour's Player Advisory Council gave him a platform to influence policy in ways that indirectly addressed the Bryson problem. Discussions about pace of play enforcement intensified during Rory's tenure on the council. Proposals for shot clocks and stricter timing penalties gained traction. Equipment regulations around driver testing protocols became more rigorous. None of these initiatives explicitly targeted Bryson, but the timing and focus suggested a response to the challenges his approach created for tournament administration and competitive balance. The most revealing aspect of this philosophical war is how it's shaped their major championship performances. Rory has 19 top 10 finishes in majors since his last win in 2014, including multiple near misses where he held 54-hole leads or came within a stroke or two of victory. His game is consistently excellent, but major championship golf's unique pressure seems to find the tiny cracks in his armor. Bryson, by contrast, has been either spectacular or invisible. His 2020 U.S. Open victory was dominant, but outside of that triumph, he has just 5 other top 10 finishes in majors since 2018. His approach seems to lack the adaptability required when conditions don't suit power or when his physical game isn't at its peak. This pattern suggests something fundamental about their respective philosophies. Rory's traditional approach creates a high floor. He's almost always in contention because his complete game travels to any course and any conditions. But it might also create a ceiling, where the pressure of major championship Sundays exposes his inability to make the chaotic, instinctive decisions that define transcendent clutch performance. Bryson's engineering approach creates incredible peaks. When everything aligns, he's unbeatable, but also dramatic valleys when variables he can't control disrupt his optimization. Golf, ultimately, might be a game that resists pure engineering, that demands the kind of creative chaos that Rory represents, even as it occasionally rewards Bryson's calculated dominance. The future of professional golf will be shaped by which philosophy proves more successful over the next decade. And that's why Rory's willingness to finally call out what Bryson represents matters so profoundly. This isn't just professional jealousy or personal dislike. This is a battle for golf's identity. Golf history is littered with disruptors who challenged the establishment and paid a price for it, at least initially. Bryson DeChambeau's controversial status isn't unprecedented. It's actually part of a recurring pattern where innovation or defiance triggers backlash from the sport's traditional guardians. The closest historical parallel might be Greg Norman's rebellion in the 1990s, when the Shark attempted to create a world golf tour that would have fundamentally restructured professional golf's power dynamics and revenue distribution. Norman's proposal was rejected by nearly every top player. The PGA Tour rallied its membership against him, and he was effectively ostracized from golf's inner circle for years. Sound familiar? Norman's World Golf Tour would have featured no-cut events, guaranteed appearance fees, and significantly higher prize purses funded by global television deals. The PGA Tour, led by Commissioner Tim Fincham and supported by player directors including Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, successfully painted Norman's vision as greedy, selfish, and destructive to golf's meritocratic principles. Norman lost that battle in the 1990s, but he won the war 25 years later when he became the commissioner of LIV Golf, essentially implementing his original vision with Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, providing the financial muscle he lacked decades earlier. Bryson became one of Norman's key recruits, creating a direct line between golf's most controversial disruption attempt in the 1990s and its most controversial disruption in the 2020s. The statistical comparison between Norman's peak dominance and Bryson's current career trajectory reveals interesting patterns. Norman won 2 Open championships and held the world #1 ranking for 331 weeks, an astonishing total that reflects sustained excellence at the game's highest level. His career earnings on the PGA Tour totaled just over $14 million, which seems quaint by modern standards but was extraordinary for his era. Bryson, through 2024, had accumulated approximately $43 million in PGA Tour career earnings before his LIV departure, plus his reported $125 million LIV contract. The financial scales have changed dramatically, but the pattern of controversy remains consistent. Both players challenged golf's establishment, both were vilified for it, and both bet their legacies on alternative visions for professional golf structure. Another parallel worth examining is Tiger Woods in his absolute prime, particularly 2000 to 2002, when his dominance was so complete that it raised existential questions about competitive balance. Tiger's winning margins and statistical superiority during that stretch were historically unprecedented. In 2000, he won 9 times on the PGA Tour, including 3 majors, and his stroke average of 67.79 was the lowest in Tour history. His closest competitor in strokes gained that season was behind by more than 2 strokes per round on average, a gap so enormous that it suggested Tiger was playing a fundamentally different game than everyone else. Critics worried that Tiger's dominance would make golf unwatchable, that no one would tune in to watch coronations rather than competitions. Yet television ratings during Tiger's peak years were spectacular. The 2000 U.S. Open at Pebble Beach, where Tiger won by 15 strokes in what remains the most dominant major championship performance ever, drew an average of 6.8 million viewers for NBC's final round coverage, a 34% increase over the previous year. The 2001 Masters, where Tiger completed the Tiger Slam by holding all 4 major championships simultaneously, pulled 14.1 million viewers for CBS's Sunday broadcast, the highest Masters rating in nearly a decade. Dominance, it turned out, was compelling when it came from a transcendent talent who played beautiful, creative golf and delivered dramatic moments through shot-making brilliance rather than physical overpowering. Bryson's 2020 U.S. Open victory provides an instructive contrast. NBC's final round coverage drew 5.1 million viewers, a respectable number but actually down 12% from the previous year's final round, despite Bryson delivering the kind of dominant performance that should theoretically create must-watch television. The difference wasn't margin of victory. Tiger won majors by enormous margins and ratings soared. Bryson won by 6 and ratings dipped. The difference was style. Tiger's dominance came from magical short game, clutch putts, and creative shot shaping that felt like artistry. Bryson's dominance came from overpowering architecture through sheer force, and casual fans found it less compelling even as hardcore golf analytics enthusiasts celebrated the strategic innovation. Rory McIlroy's career arc invites comparison to Phil Mickelson's journey in fascinating ways. Both were prodigious talents who won multiple majors early in their careers. Phil won his first at the 2004 Masters at age 33 after years of heartbreak. Rory won his first at the 2011 U.S. Open at age 22. Both became fan favorites through charisma and aggressive playing styles. Both struggled with closing out major championships despite having games seemingly built for those exact stages. Phil's near misses at the U.S. Open became a defining narrative of his career, just as Rory's major drought since 2014 has become the dominant story of his prime years. Phil accumulated 6 runner-up finishes at the U.S. Open alone before finally breaking through with his shocking 2021 PGA Championship victory at age 50. The financial comparison between Phil's career and Rory's highlights the sport's evolution. Phil's career PGA Tour earnings exceeded $96 million before his LIV departure, accumulated over nearly 30 years of elite play. His endorsement portfolio, including long-term partnerships with Callaway, KPMG, and Rolex, was estimated to generate between $40 and $50 million annually at its peak. Rory's PGA Tour earnings through 2024 totaled approximately $86 million in just 16 years as a professional, and his endorsement portfolio with TaylorMade, Nike, NBC Sports, and others was estimated at $50 to $60 million annually. Both players represented premium brands, but Rory's earning power per year significantly exceeded Phil's, reflecting golf's growth as a global sport and the increased value of elite player endorsements in the social media era. Phil's eventual defection to LIV Golf for a reported $200 million created a different kind of controversy than Bryson's departure. Phil was 51 years old, clearly in the twilight of his competitive career, and framed his decision partly around grievances with the PGA Tour's media rights policies and player compensation structure. Bryson was 38 when he joined LIV, theoretically still in his competitive prime, and couldn't credibly claim he was being unfairly compensated. He'd earned tens of millions and had a robust endorsement portfolio. Phil's departure felt like a bitter divorce after a long marriage. Bryson's felt like a betrayal during the honeymoon. The Koepka-Rory dynamic offers yet another comparative lens. Brooks, Koepka, and Rory both have 4 major championships, both have been world number 1, and both have reputations as elite ball strikers with power off the tee. But their paths diverged sharply when Koepka joined LIV for a reported $100 to $140 million. Koepka's relationship with the PGA Tour had always been transactional. He played minimal schedules, showed up for majors and big events, and made no secret of his disinterest in tour politics or institutional loyalty. Rory, by contrast, had become the tour's conscience, its most articulate defender, its future-focused leader. When Koepka left, it stung, but it wasn't shocking. If Rory had left, it would have been existentially devastating for the PGA Tour's credibility. Koepka's major championship record actually improved after joining LIV. He won the 2023 PGA Championship at Oak Hill, added another top 5 finish at the US Open, and seemed physically healthier playing a reduced schedule. His career earnings, combining PGA Tour prize money and his LIV guarantee, likely exceeded $200 million by early 2024. Rory's loyalty to the PGA Tour, while admirable, came with an opportunity cost approaching $500 million in foregone guaranteed money. That sacrifice matters enormously when evaluating his moral authority to criticize players like Bryson. Rory didn't just talk about loyalty and tradition. He bet his financial future on those principles. The comparison that might matter most, though, is between Bryson and Dustin Johnson. DJ joined LIV for a reported $125 million, the same ballpark as Bryson's deal, and both were major champions in their early 30s when they signed. But DJ had won 2 majors, 24 PGA Tour events, and held the world number 1 ranking for more accumulated weeks than any player other than Tiger, Rory, and Greg Norman. His defection was a massive blow to the PGA Tour's prestige. Bryson had won 1 major, 8 PGA Tour events, and spent minimal time in the top 5 of world rankings. His departure was significant but not catastrophic. Yet Bryson generated far more controversy and animosity from fellow professionals than DJ ever did. The reason for that disparity reveals everything about why Rory and others harbored such intense feelings about Bryson specifically. DJ was well liked in locker rooms, kept his head down, didn't lecture anyone about optimization or methodology, and simply played great golf without needing to theorize about it. Bryson positioned himself as golf's great innovator, its intellectual revolutionary, someone who had figured out solutions that everyone else was too traditional or too stubborn to embrace. And then he left for guaranteed money, which made his entire intellectual positioning seem like a rationalization for self-interest, rather than a genuine philosophical commitment. That's what Rory found unforgivable. Not that Bryson left, but that he dressed up leaving as if it were another innovation when it was just about money. The LIV Golf disruption didn't just fracture professional golf along financial lines, it exposed fault lines that had existed for years, particularly regarding player compensation, schedule flexibility, and the PGA Tour's monopsony power over elite professional golf in North America. When the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund announced in October 2021 that it was committing billions to a new golf league, the initial response from the golf establishment was dismissive. Commissioner Jay Monahan and the PGA Tour's leadership believed player loyalty would hold, that the Tour's history and prestige would outweigh any financial offer. They were catastrophically wrong. The financial architecture of LIV Golf was designed to be irresistible. The league offered guaranteed contracts ranging from $100 million to over $200 million for its biggest stars, with no cuts in tournaments, significantly smaller fields, and a team component that added millions in additional prize money. The 2023 LIV Golf season featured 14 events with $25 million purses for individual competition, and $5 million for team competition at each event, $405 million in total prize money for just 14 tournaments, and 48 roster spots. By comparison, the PGA Tour's entire 2023 season spread across 44 official events and hundreds of players, distributed approximately $430 million in prize money. The concentration of wealth in LIV was staggering. Bryson's reported $125 million guarantee made him one of LIV's marquee signings, announced in the same wave as Brooks Koepka and Patrick Reed. The timing of his announcement in June 2022 came just weeks after Rory had given an impassioned defense of the PGA Tour at the RBC Canadian Open, where he criticized LIV-bound players for taking blood money and abandoning the tour that made them wealthy and famous. Bryson's defection felt like a direct rebuke to Rory's moral framework. They'd been rivals, occasional practice round partners, and players who respected each other's games even when they disagreed about methods. Now they were on opposite sides of professional golf's Cold War. The business implications of LIV's model threatened everything Rory had built his career defending. The PGA Tour's structure, for all its problems, was fundamentally meritocratic. Players earned their cards through qualifying schools or developmental tours. They kept their cards by performing well enough to maintain status, and prize money was distributed based on finish positions. LIV's guaranteed contracts eliminated performance pressure, at least financially. A player signed to a $100 million deal could finish last in every event and still collect their guarantee. For Rory, this represented an abandonment of competition's essence. For Bryson, it represented financial security that freed him to experiment and take risks without fearing career consequences. Television viewership data reveals LIV's struggle to gain mainstream traction despite its financial firepower. The league's 2023 broadcast partnership with the CW network produced disappointing ratings. Most LIV events drew between 250,000 and 400,000 viewers for weekend coverage, compared to PGA Tour events on CBS and NBC that routinely exceeded 2 million viewers. LIV's most watched event of 2023, the season-ending championship in Miami, drew approximately 712,000 viewers, still well below average PGA Tour viewership. The disparity suggested that casual golf fans remained loyal to the PGA Tour's familiar stars and established events, and that LIV's biggest names, including Bryson, hadn't translated their individual brands into compelling television content. Bryson's pivot to content creation partially filled that gap. His YouTube channel became a laboratory for his personality, featuring everything from long drive competitions to break 70 challenges on amateur courses to collaborations with other content creators. Within 18 months of joining LIV, Bryson's YouTube subscriber count exceeded 1.2 million, and individual videos routinely generated between 500,000 and 2 million views, comparable to or exceeding LIV's television viewership for actual tournaments. The lesson was clear. Bryson's value wasn't primarily as a tournament competitor anymore, it was as a media personality and content generator. That evolution further separated him from traditional professionals like Rory, who competed primarily to win championships and measured success through trophies, not clicks. Sponsorship behavior revealed deep corporate ambivalence about LIV. Many of Bryson's major sponsors, including Cobra Puma Golf and NetJets, remained with him after his LIV move, calculating that his individual brand wasn't significantly damaged by the controversy. But new sponsorship opportunities largely dried up. Major American corporations, wary of the Saudi funding source and uncertain about LIV's long-term viability, avoided new partnerships with LIV players. The contrast with PGA Tour loyalists was stark. Rory signed a new multi-year extension with TaylorMade in 2023, reportedly worth over $100 million in total value, and he added partnerships with NBC Sports as an on-air commentator for major championships. The market rewarded loyalty, at least in traditional endorsement terms, even as LIV rewarded defection with guaranteed money. The merger announcement in June 2023, revealing that the PGA Tour, DP World Tour, and LIV's Saudi backers were forming a unified commercial entity, shocked the golf world and particularly devastated Rory. He'd been the PGA Tour's most vocal defender, had turned down generational wealth to remain loyal, and had taken enormous criticism for his public stance against LIV players. Then Jay Monahan and the tour's leadership negotiated a merger without consulting the very players who'd sacrificed financially to support the tour's position. Rory's initial response in media interviews revealed genuine hurt and betrayal. He called the situation hard to stomach and admitted he felt sacrificed by leadership that had asked for his loyalty and then negotiated away the principles he'd defended. Bryson's response to the merger talks was telling. He publicly expressed openness to reconciliation, said he missed certain aspects of PGA Tour competition, and suggested the fracture wasn't as permanent as many believed. But he also made clear he had no regrets about his LIV decision, emphasizing the financial security and schedule flexibility it provided. The contrast with Rory's visible anguish was stark. Bryson had made a transaction, money for playing rights, and seemed content with that exchange. Rory had made an identity investment, and watching that investment potentially dissolve into a merger with the very entity he'd opposed created an existential crisis. The Ryder Cup implications added another layer of complexity. Team USA's qualification system historically relied on points earned through PGA Tour and major championship performance. LIV players, competing in events that didn't award world ranking points, saw their ranking plummet, jeopardizing their Ryder Cup eligibility. The 2023 Ryder Cup team in Rome featured no LIV players, a decision that seemed partially competitive. LIV players weren't playing enough high-level competition to justify selection, but also partially punitive. U.S. captain Zach Johnson's team lost decisively to Europe, 16.5 to 11.5, raising immediate questions about whether excluding talented players like Bryson, Koepka, and DJ had cost Team USA victory. The prospect of LIV players rejoining Ryder Cup teams in 2025 forced uncomfortable conversations. Could Rory and Bryson share a team room? Could they support each other's matches? The history of contentious Ryder Cup pairings offered mixed precedents. Hal Sutton famously paired Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson in the 2004 Ryder Cup, despite their barely concealed mutual dislike, and the pairing was a disaster, losing both matches they played together. But Europe had successfully navigated personality conflicts through strong captaincy and shared nationalist purpose. The question wasn't whether Rory and Bryson could be civil, they're both professionals, but whether the underlying philosophical divide would undermine team chemistry in high-pressure moments. Financial projections for a post-merger professional golf landscape suggested enormous wealth concentration at the top. If LIV and PGA Tour unified into a single commercial entity with streamlined competition, the top 50 players in the world could potentially share in revenue distributions exceeding $1 billion annually. That would represent a fundamental shift from golf's historical economic model, where prize money was broadly distributed across hundreds of tour members, toward a superstar-driven model more similar to Formula One or professional tennis. Rory would benefit enormously from such a structure, but it would also validate the moves that players like Bryson made. Their defection would have forced the change that enriched everyone. That potential outcome, Bryson's controversial move leading to systemic change that benefited even the players who stayed loyal, represents Rory's nightmare scenario. It would mean his loyalty and sacrifice were unnecessary, that Bryson's mercenary approach was actually strategically superior, and that the moral framework Rory built his opposition around was naive. The possibility of that validation is perhaps the real reason Rory's frustration with Bryson has reached a breaking point. It's not just about the past, it's about the future, and whether professional golf's evolution will reward the Rorys or the Brysons. The Rory-Bryson divide is ultimately a proxy war for professional golf's future identity, and the resolution of their conflict, or lack thereof, will shape the sport for the next generation of players, fans, and commercial stakeholders. The most immediate question facing the sport in 2025 and beyond is whether professional golf can sustain two competing philosophies, or whether one approach will prove definitively superior and force the other into obsolescence. World ranking implications for LIV players remain contentious and unresolved. As of late 2024, LIV Golf events still did not award official world golf ranking points, meaning players like Bryson saw their rankings plummet despite competing regularly. Bryson's world ranking dropped from a peak of number 4 in 2021 to outside the top 150 by early 2024, purely as a function of mathematical decay rather than competitive decline. This created absurd scenarios where players who'd won majors within the past 5 years couldn't qualify for other majors through ranking criteria. The O's board of directors, influenced heavily by the PGA Tour and European Tour representatives, maintained that LIV's format didn't meet minimum standards for ranking inclusion, specifically the 54-hole, no-cut structure and the limited field size. The political maneuvering around world rankings will determine major championship fields for years to come. If LIV events eventually receive ranking points as part of a broader peace agreement or commercial merger, players like Bryson could quickly rebuild their ranking positions and secure automatic qualifying spots for majors. If the ranking freeze persists, LIV players will increasingly depend on past champion exemptions and special invitations, a precarious position that diminishes as years pass without major victories. Bryson's 2020 U.S. Open victory provides exemption through 2030, but beyond that, he'll need either ranking points, another major victory, or a fundamental restructuring of major championship qualifying criteria. The financial trajectory of elite professional golf appears headed toward a bifurcated model. A small number of mega-rich superstars earning $30 to $50 million annually or more through prize money, guarantees, and endorsements, while the middle and lower tiers of tour professionals struggle increasingly for sponsorship opportunities and tournament spots. This trend was already visible before LIV's emergence. The top 10 earners on the PGA Tour in 2021 claimed approximately 35% of total prize money, despite representing just 5% of the playing population. LIV's guaranteed contracts accelerated this wealth concentration. If a merger creates a unified structure with elevated events featuring limited fields and massive purses, the gap between golf's haves and have-nots will expand exponentially. Rory's position as a player director on the PGA Tour's policy board gives him significant influence over how these structural changes evolve. His advocacy for elevated events with limited fields and larger purses, essentially creating a tour within a tour for elite players, represents a pragmatic acknowledgement that golf's economic model must change to retain top talent. But it also represents a philosophical compromise with the very forces he criticized Bryson for embracing. If professional golf's future is guaranteed money for elite players regardless of performance, then what exactly was the principle Rory was defending by refusing LIV's offer? The answer may be that the principle was timing and source, that change should come through evolution within golf's existing structures rather than revolution funded by Saudi Arabia. But that distinction grows murkier as the proposed merger integrates Saudi capital directly into the PGA Tour's ownership structure. Equipment regulation battles will intensify over the next 3 years as the USGA and R&A implement their proposed golf ball rollback for elite competition. The plan, announced in 2023 with a target implementation date of 2026, would require tour professionals to use balls that travel approximately 15 yards shorter than current models under standardized testing conditions. The stated goal is to preserve classic golf course architecture and prevent distance from making course strategy irrelevant. The unstated goal is to neutralize players like Bryson, whose games are built around overpowering courses through sheer length. If implemented, this rule change would disproportionately harm the longest hitters. Bryson's 322-yard average would drop to approximately 307 yards, while shorter hitters losing just 8 or 10 yards would maintain their relative position. The competitive balance would shift back toward accuracy and iron play, precisely the skill set where Rory excels. Bryson has publicly opposed the ball rollback, arguing it's a reactionary rule change that punishes athleticism and innovation. He's called it stupid and suggested that if distance is truly the problem, golf courses should simply be lengthened rather than limiting what athletes can achieve. His argument has merit. Track and field doesn't slow down sprinters when records fall. Basketball didn't lower the rim when players started dunking regularly. But golf's counterargument is that the sport's venues are finite resources, that lengthening courses damages environmentally sensitive areas and increases maintenance costs, and that preserving architecture from golf's golden age is worth protecting even if it means constraining modern performance. The generational divide within professional golf will determine which philosophy prevails. Players who came of age in the 2000s and early 2000s, Scottie Scheffler, Colin Morikawa, Victor Hovland, Ludwig Åberg, have benefited from modern coaching technology, TrackMan data, and biomechanical analysis that would have been unimaginable to previous generations. They're all long hitters by historical standards, all data-informed in their practice routines, and all comfortable with sports science integration. Yet most of them sided with Rory and the PGA Tour during the LIV crisis. Their loyalty wasn't to traditional methods. Their games are thoroughly modern, but to the competitive meritocracy that the PGA Tour represented. That suggests the Rory-Bryson divide isn't purely about methodology. It's about values and what professional golf should reward. Younger players entering the professional ranks now face a different calculus than Rory or Bryson did. For players turning professional in 2024 and beyond, LIV Golf and the PGA Tour are simply competitive options, not moral choices freighted with loyalty narratives. If a 22-year-old elite amateur receives a $15 million LIV offer versus grinding through Korn Ferry Tour qualifying, the decision seems obvious regardless of philosophical alignment with traditional golf values. The market is already demonstrating this reality. Several top amateurs and young professionals have signed with LIV, despite having no previous PGA Tour history to feel conflicted about leaving. This talent pipeline threatens the PGA Tour's developmental model and creates a future where LIV captures players before they ever establish tour allegiances. Ryder Cup competition in 2025 and beyond will serve as a laboratory for whether these divides can be bridged under nationalist purpose. The European team has historically been better at sublimating individual egos and conflicts for collective success. Their Ryder Cup record over the past 30 years demonstrates that cultural advantage. Team USA's recent struggles, including losses in 4 of the last 5 Ryder Cups, have prompted calls for radical change in selection criteria, captaincy approach, and team preparation. If U.S. captain Keegan Bradley selects LIV players for the 2025 team at Bethpage Black, the dynamics between Rory, potentially playing for the international team if captain's picks are utilized creatively, and Bryson could create must-watch television and either a redemptive moment of unity or a spectacular public implosion. The broadcasting landscape for professional golf will fragment further before it consolidates. CBS and NBC hold traditional television rights for PGA Tour events and majors, delivering reliable but aging audiences. Average viewer age for major championship broadcasts exceeds 55 years old, a concerning demographic trend for advertisers. LIV's struggle to secure premium broadcast partners suggests traditional networks are skeptical about golf's growth potential beyond established events. Meanwhile, streaming platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Apple TV Plus have expressed interest in golf content, but primarily in documentary and behind-the-scenes formats rather than live competition. The sport is caught between an aging traditional audience and a younger demographic that consumes golf content through YouTube highlights and social media clips rather than 4-hour live broadcasts. Bryson's YouTube success points toward a possible future where elite players control their own media production and distribution, reducing dependence on traditional broadcast partners and tour organizations. If Bryson can generate 15 million views per month across his YouTube content, that's comparable to the cumulative viewership of several mid-tier PGA Tour events. And YouTube revenue, combined with direct sponsorship integration and content, could eventually rival prize money for players who build substantial followings. This creator economy model would fundamentally disrupt professional golf's business structure, shifting power from tour organizations to individual player brands. Rory, despite his social media presence, hasn't embraced content creation with Bryson's enthusiasm, potentially missing a strategic opportunity to diversify his revenue and influence beyond traditional competitive golf. The major championships will remain the ultimate arbiter of legacy and the one unifying force across professional golf's fractured landscape. The Masters, US Open, Open Championship, and PGA Championship remain independent of tour politics, accepting top players regardless of their organizational affiliation. Bryson's challenge is maintaining the competitive sharpness necessary to contend in majors while playing a reduced schedule against weaker competition in live events. His 2024 US Open performance at Pinehurst, where he finished tied for 6th, suggested his game remained sharp despite limited high-level competition. But sustaining major championship contention into his 40s while playing just 18 to 20 competitive rounds per year in meaningful events will require extraordinary discipline and peak physical maintenance, precisely the area where his power-based approach faces the greatest sustainability questions. Rory's major championship drought since 2014 has become the defining narrative of his career, overshadowing his consistent excellence across every other competitive measure. He's accumulated over $86 million in PGA Tour earnings, spent over 100 weeks as world number one, won multiple FedEx Cup titles and season-long championships, and remained in the top 10 in the world for nearly his entire professional career. By almost every measure except the one that matters most, he's been the player of his generation. Yet without a fifth major, his legacy will always carry an asterisk. The pressure of that drought grows heavier each year, and the psychological toll of coming close repeatedly without breaking through may be his greatest obstacle. If Bryson adds a second major before Rory wins his fifth, the narrative implications would be devastating for Rory's historical standing. The possibility of reconciliation between Rory and Bryson seems remote, but not impossible. Professional sports history offers examples of bitter rivals who eventually found mutual respect or even friendship. Think Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, whose professional rivalry gave way to genuine personal connection. But those reconciliations typically happened after competitive careers ended, when the stakes lowered and perspective arrived. Rory and Bryson are both still in their competitive primes, still fighting for the same major championships and historical recognition. The wounds from the LIV split remain fresh, the philosophical divide remains unbridged, and the financial incentives still pull them in opposite directions. Any reconciliation would require either a dramatic change in professional golf structure that validates both their choices, or one of them admitting their approach was wrong. Neither scenario seems likely in the near term. The next generation of golf fans will inherit this divided landscape and decide which vision resonates more deeply. If they gravitate toward Bryson's content, his personality, his scientific approach, and willingness to challenge tradition, then professional golf's future will look dramatically different than its past. More individual, more commercialized, more personality-driven, less institutional. If they gravitate toward Rory's excellence, his loyalty, his traditional approach and connection to golf's history, then the sport will weather this disruption and reaffirm its core values. Most likely, the future will blend both visions, creating a professional golf ecosystem where players like Rory and Bryson can coexist, compete, and represent different but equally valid approaches to the sport. But make no mistake, the tension between them is real, the stakes are enormous, and the resolution of their conflict will echo through professional golf for decades. Through our show. Section 7. Closing reflection. When Rory McIlroy finally spoke openly about Bryson DeChambeau, he wasn't just airing personal grievances or engaging in petty rivalry. He was articulating a fundamental question that professional golf has been avoiding for years. Does the sport reward innovation or tradition? Does it celebrate those who push boundaries and challenge conventions? Or does it honor those who excel within established frameworks and respect the game's inherited values? The answer, unsatisfyingly but truthfully, is that golf has always struggled to balance both impulses. The sport reveres its history while quietly enabling its disruptors. It celebrates tradition on Sunday afternoons at Augusta, while the equipment manufacturers race to build drivers that travel 5 yards farther. It demands etiquette and decorum while packaging rivalries and controversies for television ratings. Bryson DeChambeau represents the logical endpoint of golf's modernization. A player who embraced every technological advantage, maximized every physical capability, and pursued every dollar available in a rapidly commercializing sport. He didn't cheat. He didn't break rules. He simply optimized within the systems professional golf created, and then he left for a better offer when one materialized. That's not villainy, it's rational economic behavior. The anger directed at him, particularly from Rory, stems from a deeper anxiety about what his success represents. If Bryson's approach is correct, if golf can be engineered, if tradition is negotiable, if loyalty is naive, then what does that say about the players who sacrificed for principles that may no longer matter? Rory McIlroy represents something equally important: the belief that sports should be more than optimized transactions, that there's value in loyalty beyond its economic return. and that excellence achieved through traditional paths has a different quality than excellence manufactured through disruption. His willingness to turn down $500 million to remain with the PGA Tour was either noble or foolish, depending on your perspective. But it was undeniably a statement that money isn't everything, that institutions matter, and that professional golf's soul is worth protecting even at enormous personal cost. Whether future generations of players will make similar choices seems increasingly doubtful. Rory may represent the last of a dying breed, the loyal institutional player who believes the collective good of professional golf matters more than individual enrichment. The reality is that professional golf needs both figures. It needs Bryson's innovation, his willingness to ask uncomfortable questions, his ability to generate attention and engagement from audiences who might otherwise ignore the sport. And it needs Rory's excellence, his articulate defense of golf's values, his connection to the game's history and meaning beyond mere competition. The sport is richer for their conflict, even as that conflict threatens to tear it apart. Their rivalry, philosophical, professional, and increasingly personal, gives golf narrative weight that pure athletic competition often lacks. It makes casual fans care about outcomes, prompts debate, and elevates tournaments into cultural moments. The questions their conflict raises are worth debating. Is Bryson DeChambeau good for professional golf, or is his approach destructive to the sport's essence? Did his LIV decision represent pragmatism or betrayal? Is Rory McIlroy's loyalty admirable or naive? Should professional golf embrace disruption or resist it? Can the sport survive as a divided ecosystem with competing tours and philosophies, or does it need unified structure to maintain credibility and commercial value? Should golf's governing bodies limit distance and power to preserve classic courses, or should they let the game evolve naturally through technological and athletic advancement? These aren't questions with obvious answers, and they're not questions that Rory or Bryson can resolve alone. They require professional golf's stakeholders, players, fans, administrators, broadcasters, sponsors, to collectively decide what they value most. The coming years will provide those answers through market forces, competitive results, and the choices made by the next generation of elite players. Whether professional golf emerges from this period stronger and more unified, or permanently fractured into competing visions, depends on leadership and compromise that has been largely absent so far. What's certain is that Rory McIlroy's willingness to finally expose his real frustrations with Bryson DeChambeau has given the golf world permission to have these difficult conversations openly. For years, players spoke in coded language, leaked anonymous quotes, and avoided direct confrontation. Rory's candor, even if uncomfortable, serves the sport better than polite silence. It acknowledges the genuine tensions that exist, respects the audience's intelligence, and treats professional golf's current crisis as serious rather than something to be managed through public relations spin. The Rory-Bryson divide is professional golf's defining conflict of this era. How it resolves or doesn't resolve will determine what the sport looks like for decades to come. And both of them, in their own ways, are fighting for golf's future. They just have radically different visions of what that future should be.